Are we on? Yep. Okay, I think we're live.
Great.
Right. First, we want to thank everyone for joining us on the first of an 8-part series that we're starting called Community Conversations on Race. We wanted to start talking about hard subjects and being real. And so thank you for joining us. We would love for you to listen to the first part of the conversation, and then we'll open it up at the end for questions. We are very honored to have today Karin Demarest, Vice President for Community Impact, Community Foundation of Sonoma County. And she is going to interview our very own Vince Harper, who is the Director of Community Engagement. Thanks you guys for being here, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Katie. I am really honored to be here, and thank you, Vince. I can't express my gratitude enough. And I want to start our conversation by being transparent. I want to be transparent about the symbology of a white woman interviewing an African-American man, and acknowledge that this is the context of our conversation. And within that context, I will probably express my implicit bias. And just by the nature of my own privilege as a white woman, I am a white woman in a racist society. There is the potential that some of the things I say might cause harm. And I want to apologize for that in advance. And I want to seek your feedback, because I, along with many people in our country right now, are in a process of learning. Because the conversations between Black people and white people about racism, they're really hard to have. And part of the reason for that is it's well documented that there are racist responses from us white folks that place an undue burden on people of color when we're having these conversations. I think of examples like we might get defensive, or we might ask you to ease our white guilt, or we might try to prove you wrong by giving evidence against your own personal experience. I can imagine that this is a real burden. And right now, Black people want to be heard. I mean, always, and Black people deserve to be heard. And it is our turn to listen, to really listen. So Vince, my first question for you, if you really trusted that we were listening as best we can, that I am listening, that the people out there in your community are listening, what would you want us to know?
I think just the fact of listening is very important, and listening not just in order to make a counter statement, or like you said earlier, to refute what we're saying or make us prove it. I think just the act of just listening is very important. And I think I would want to have an ongoing dialogue and have people truly understand what it's like to be an African American in this country.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to really commend Community Action Partnership for saying we're going to have these series of conversations, and really invite everybody today who is with us to really notice what it is when you're listening, what is your experience, and how can you open to learning from Vince, who is boldly stepping forward to share his experience. So Vince, maybe we could start with you helping us know you better by sharing a story or two about your family, about your history.
Yeah, thank you. Have been thinking a lot about this, so where I wanted to start, but the big thing to know for me is know that my grandfather on my dad's side lived in Arkansas, and he was a sharecropper, and one of the most impactful things that my dad would talk about during his time explaining his childhood was basically that his dad, worked very hard. He really wanted to do better for the family, and so when they were down in Arkansas, everybody worked. It was just what they did, picking cotton, doing whatever the crops were that he was sharecropping, and and there was a story that my dad told me about his about what the environment was like in Arkansas way back then, and he talked about that their the owner of what formerly the plantation, his name was Mr. Johnson, and so he, everybody called him Mr. Johnson, and he would talk about how that Mr. Johnson was kind of like the law there. So if any of his the people that worked for him, African Americans that worked for him, got into trouble, ended up in jail because of something that they did, Mr. Johnson would come down and he would get them out. He would just say word, and like that he'd be able to get them out. And I think so it was very hard, kind of living down there. And my dad never really talked about it. And I remember asking him when he was much older, his little brother used to talk about it a lot. So he would tell us stories and those kinds of things. And I said to my dad one day, I said, your brother, he talks about it all the time. How come you don't talk about growing up? So he was my Uncle Billy, and Billy, would share and share. And my dad looked at me and he said, Billy had a different experience. It was just totally different. We had to work, and he got to be young. He got to be a kid. And so, and he doesn't remember the work part because he was so young before the family moved up to Detroit. So they were part of the Black migration from the South to the North for better opportunities in order to, what they were thinking. They were moving away to freedom, but essentially they moved away to just a different kind of world, segregation and other problems that weren't, you still could get lynched, but it wasn't as bad. So it was kind of depressing to hear the full stories about that. And I think so that movement, and then my mom's side of the family was really they never talk about how it was back in the South. And all I know about my grandfather on her side is basically that he disappeared in Texas, and here they are. They moved to a suburb of Detroit. So so not a lot of family history, and not the big expansive like my dad's family, which still has a huge number of our relatives in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. So that's your history. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Detroit.
So so it was a little different. My dad, went to high school down there, and he joined the Air Force. So I have a different experience than my cousins who ended up staying in Detroit and living their whole lives there. So my dad joined the Air Force. Interesting enough, with my mom's brother. So they went in at the same time. My mom's brother, he did his 4 years and he was done. My dad ended up making a career of the Air Force, and so we moved around. So every Philippines we lived in Ohio, northern Michigan, New York. So we did a lot of traveling in between, and so I had a different sense of I had armed forces TV and radio, so you really didn't have a sense of what was really going on around the civil rights movement or what was going on at home. And so I had a little bit of a sheltered experience in terms of that, but a lot of experience around our lives and running into issues wherever we lived, around being one of the few African American kids in the classroom, and still having racism touch us in many different ways, no matter what country we were in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So did you find that being sheltered in that way, when you did enter the world, let's say when you went to college or you left the military environment, was it shocking on your system?
I think I don't know if it was shocking. It's just because it would be explained to us basically by my dad. So there was a different kind of expectation. So, you know, as I grew older, I knew you know, there was expectation that I trusted authority, and that my chief role in this world was to, you know, go to school, get good grades, and do well, and get a good job, and get a pension and all that stuff. But the undercurrent of that was that you will not. I mean, I remember always asking my dad and talking about fairness, and you know, and realizing that the world was very different for being Black, and that world for us was that we couldn't expect fairness. You know, it is what it is. You do the best you can, and you, I mean, you know, get even by succeeding. You know, so all of those things. You know, certainly when I got to be a teenager, I got to talk about, you know, be careful, beware of the police. You know, if you ever get stopped, you need to do what they say. And the most important thing is that they wanted me to come home alive, you know. So, and I was trying to think the other day about whether I got the birds and the bees. I don't remember getting a sit down talk about that, but I did often, and quite often, get to talk about, you know, coming home alive, or, you know, having problems at school, and making sure that I need to control myself and make sure I come home and tell them that my parents were going to be the ones that were going to go down to the police station or go down to the school, and they were going to fight for me, and not to get stuck in that terrible sense of prejudice, or even, you know, life or death situations as well.
You mentioned that there was a story about your uncle and how that influenced you. Would you be willing to share that story?
Yeah, sure. So there are a number of, you know, stories, as I was talking about, that kind of are passed down in the family history. And so when my uncle was living in Detroit, it was really, there was this notorious squad of police officer cops that would go into the Black community, and they would essentially, you know, beat people, you know, for no reason. And so they were very notorious that, you know, they were kind of had this special special, I don't know, I don't even want to call it immunity, but this special ability to just go out there and 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 do damage to people. And so the story goes that my uncle was coming home from studying, you know, so he was a law student, and he essentially ran into this unit, and they beat him so badly, and so and I mean, you know, there was nothing that could be done about it. You know, he took his lumps, and then it became a family story that it was hard to trust the police, you know. So it was a kind of a weird kind of situation where it was an expectation that you do what they say, but at the same time don't trust them, and be fearful of them. And so that story kind of has been with me ever since I was a teenager when I first heard it. And then knowing that my uncle, you know, later became a judge. Actually, I went out and I was passing out flyers for him, so I had that whole campaign experience. But to know that he didn't stop, he and many people could have. When you have this experience with the legal authorities doing harm to you, you could say, it's just not for me, I'll give up. And he continued on, and he ended up becoming a judge, and very successful. So very proud of him. But there's, like I said, there's that story. And then the other thing I think that's really important to me, after my mother died, visiting with my uncle, and staying in his house at that same time, and then seeing my other relatives, cousins, talk about my older ones, uncles and their cousins and things like that, talking about their experience of living down south, and the idea of, you didn't travel at night, you had to watch where you turned, because if you turn down the wrong road, there could be a massing group, maybe the KKK, maybe just, you know, white men looking to harm Black people at that point in time, and then often the law enforcement might be with them, and so there's a whole sense of real big trust issues around law enforcement that kind of carried on throughout my experience and the warnings that my mom and dad would give to me.
I want to fold that into a question around your work at Community Action Partnership and your role as community engagement manager. And so, is it manager?
Director of community.
Director. Community engagement director. And what in your life has led to your work there? And also, if I'm thinking about who you are in our community. You are a beloved member of our community, and you do a lot of bridge building between neighborhoods and people in neighborhoods and law enforcement. And so how have you come from a background that you've just described to being that open-hearted bridge builder?
I think that so I was the youngest of 4 children, and so I even talking among my siblings, they had a very different life than I had. I think I was lucky enough to be the last child, and so all the experimentation that my parents were doing was in terms of being parents, and what they brought from the old days of giving beatings and giving a lot of corporal punishment, that I was very fortunate. So I think the whole change in my parents' parenting style, what went from throwing a shoe at somebody or thinking about corporal punishment first to let's talk about this. And so I think that helped shape me a little different than my siblings, because I think that I couldn't remember getting, my parents and my other relatives would talk about, sending the kid to get the switch that they're going to hit them with. And I just never had that experience. So I think that kind of started in that whole conversation. My dad he was in the Air Force. Sometimes he was stationed away from us for, a year or at least a year, and sometimes, shorter stints where we just wouldn't see him. And so we'd just be able to talk to him on the phone. And I think somewhere in that, that value of conversation and dialogue and that sense of, we can talk through this, really helped me a lot, grow to be the person that I am. And so I tend to look for more, less aggressive ways to deal with people, and verbal judo and being able to have conversations and really listen to what people are saying. So I think that helped. I think the other thing that was very good for me, I had a mom who was, sometimes she was working, sometimes she was volunteering, and sometimes but all the time she was always involved in the community. So everything from being involved in the Black political organization. So she was a secretary and very involved in church, very involved in her work. She would volunteer at the library at some points in my life. She would also, I found out later on in life as she was older, I knew that she had, done some, when you're a kid, it's kind of hard, but I knew she had been involved in service for a long time, but I didn't truly understand it until she came to visit me before she died, maybe about a year or so before she died. And I took her to Community Action Partnership and to our office over on Dutton. And I was giving her the tour, and she came upon our Head Start program. And she was talking with one of the workers over there, and she said, I used to work for Head Start, when it was first, and I didn't understand this in the very beginning, but she was in the early part of Head Start. They were doing a lot of home visiting, and so my mom was involved in generally the kickoff of Head Start. So she was. Out there on the street talking to families and those kinds of things. So that kind of work. And then the next thing that she did that was very related to community action was that she worked at a senior center when I was just about 16. And I remember, taking her out there, and I would be uh, dropping her off, at the senior center and taking the car for the rest of the day. But she was working for community action in Merced at the senior center. So this feeling of service and wanting to help people, I think it came a lot from her. And so my conversations with her were mostly about, more kind of how am I feeling and how am I serving others and those kinds of things. Well, my dad was he was very, he was a military man, so he certainly believed in authority and structure, and was really connected to, you got to make money, and my mom was more like, you got to be happy. And I think I spent a lot of time with my mom, so I think she might maybe rubbed off on me more than my dad had a very big impact on me as well, but my mom, this service part and wanting to help people really came, I think, from her, just her model and the things that she did.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do and as the community engagement director?
Yeah, so I think that I have a kind of a dual role. So I have some programs that I oversee, like other program directors, but the other part of my work is is internal to Community Action Partnership, and really having dialogue and helping people within our agency to be listened to and to be connected, and hopefully help them move out of kind of our silos in our programs, and so that we have this kind of outside collaboration to help us towards our mission. And then I have a couple external roles. So I do everything from work with neighborhood residents to help them. I want, really in my heart, I really enjoy helping people to gain power within their community. So help influence them to understand, the system, to understand the importance of how they can get engaged and how they can, a lot of what happens in the world, we're very focused on kind of very programs. We help people in that way. But I really want people, and that's the mission of community action, is to help people help themselves. And so, but to move that up a notch and get them to understand that policies in the community that we live in have a real big impact on their ability to move out of poverty. So if we can have not just CAP doing work around policy, but also have the people that we serve to be agents of change as well, and understand their true power, then I think it'd be easier for us to fulfill our mission. And so that's pretty much my role. So I've worked with everything from Roseland Community Building Initiative, and helping to support and train, helping them to form their leadership group, and to also inform them about everything from how to use data to further your agenda, how to speak at public meetings, those kinds of things. So just being able to go out there and listen to people, and then help them to connect with the broader community, has been, I think, one of the most important things that I feel that I do with my organization. And then I do a smattering of other community engagement work with either groups that are forming, or maybe it's groups like, for example, we're doing. I'm working with the Juneteenth Festival Committee, and so we moved from, because of COVID-19, we moved from a festival where it's very direct and face to face with people, to a virtual. So that's coming up this Saturday. So things like that. South Park Day and Night Festival is another festival that's near and dear to my heart. After the murder of a young man in the neighborhood, we wanted the community to come together, and we wanted to have some good come to that tragedy, and help people to overcome that and know that they were safe in their community. So there's that base level of just safety to a higher level of looking at how they can create change within their community. And my happiest moments have been when youth that I worked with in the past are doing so well, and some of them are doing service. Although I kept saying to them, you guys go into banking or something, make a lot of money, be a doctor, be a lawyer or something like that, because I'm going to need that when I get old. It's very important. But seriously, the seeing them graduate from college, maybe be the first person in their family to actually graduate from high school and then graduate from college. So, it really makes me proud and kind of helps me to feel that what I've done in the past has mattered. Nothing taking away from them, but just helping them get through, maybe some challenges in their life has been very fulfilling.
Well, that the way you operate on both the human level and then the thinking about policy, it reminds me of a quote from Ibram X. Kendi. If I could quote him, "Americans have long been trained to see the deficiencies of people rather than policy." And it's a pretty easy mistake to make. People are in our faces, policies are distant. So I hear what you're saying around empowering people. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship that you see between policy and influencing policy and community engagement at the individual or neighborhood level?
Yeah, I think policy impacts us all. So it's very important. And you're right. There's often that sense of, there's a lot of feeling out there that, what I say doesn't matter, what my vote doesn't matter. And I think that it's very important for people to understand it's not easy. Policy, when you go out and you get a job and you work hard and you buy your house, you buy your car, it's very clear and concrete what you need to do, and you can certainly do well in doing that. But there's this policy level that I think that's very important, that often people of color, African Americans, are locked out of. And so you just live your life, and whatever happens happens. It allows us. It is easy to be victimized when you don't have a sense of having that sense of power and influence over how you are governed, how you are. I mean, just down to the very basics. And so, talking about what's happened in Minneapolis, I think the key is people who feel powerless, and who I try to describe it as a pressure cooker that's kind of building up. And so if you don't have a sense of power, you don't have a sense that the policies that are made, that you just don't matter. You don't have a sense of any other outlet in terms of how you can make change, then you're limited in terms of your options. Either you just take it, you protest, and or you can riot, and people talk bad about it, but people listen to it. So it's really whether you have a full range of tools in order to make change in your community. And that's why I'm so focused on policy, because you impact everyone with policy. And so if you talk about individual discrimination, it's terrible. But in a sense, if you have a systemic institutional racism, it impacts every person, Black person who comes into that system. And so if you change that, then my hope is that it kind of filters down, and you are able to get control of your community and your neighborhoods.
So what role do you see the protests now playing in advancing the individual conversations that we're having and the policy conversations? And to add a little bit to that, we have seen such a movement, a profound shift, one hopes, with the murder of George Floyd and many others, but there was like a straw there that broke the camel's back, and something has changed. But all of that seems to be motivated by individual stories. And do you have any fear that it will lose momentum or it won't actually filter into systemic institutional change?
Right. I certainly have a fear of that. I feel like oftentimes there's the going back to the pressure cooker type of example where I feel like as African American and as a Black man, we talk about it. I think I shared with you before that there's things I don't talk about in mixed company, and so I have learned to kind of you kind of keep it inside because you don't want to deal with people who are in denial or people who are white fragility that causes them to argue with everything you say. It's like, oh, it's just exhausting. And so I think that this stuff has been going on for hundreds of years, and it's just one thing after another. And where there's it feels like as a people we get some hope that things are going to change, and then all of a sudden it doesn't. And not only is it institutional and systemic, that it's in a lot of ways it's kind of it's horrific in a lot of ways, because you think you're told that there's this sunset that you're going off to and things are going to be okay, but essentially every turn you look at voting rights, you look at civil rights, there's been a chipping away of you feel like, oh, we got it, so we're heading somewhere, and then all of a sudden there's a chipping away, there's a shiny thing over there that we're worried about, the economy or something, or we don't move on because we can't. It's the waters that we swim in. But for white America, it's very easy for them to just move on and go on to the next most important thing, while we kind of grovel and feel like we're being left behind, and literally are being left behind. And then it's more insidious is the people who maybe didn't like the changes that happened back in 1968 that led to the passage of the civil rights bills and voter rights bill, and so they start to chip away at it. And so you all of a sudden you think, okay, we've got something, and then all of a sudden within a short amount of time there's something else. So whether that's voting rights and having moving from literacy tests to counting jelly beans or beans in the having to guess how many beans are in there in order to vote in a jar. And it's like just one thing after another. And I feel like it's like, oh, anybody can do that, but it's specifically targeted towards African Americans, and to disenfranchise them, to keep them powerless. And it's just tiring.
Yeah.
So just to wrap that up, so my biggest fear is that it feels like we've got some momentum right now, but essentially that what happens next? What shiny thing will come up, and then everybody's Black Lives Matter now, but ultimately for white Americans, if they need to do something else and move on, I'm hoping that we as African Americans will continue to bring that fight to the streets. But we do need allies. We can't, you know, and it's very important that people understand that we do need that allyship in order to move this agenda, you know, to help us get to the table, policymaking table, so that we can, you know, make changes within our community. You know, no, don't do for us, but you know, share that power and influence, that privilege that you have.
Yeah. What might that look like? I don't want you to have to solve it for us, but what, from your vantage point? And I'm thinking about youth, because you're so connected with youth, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's so being a good ally, essentially, you know, that first step is listening. That second step is using, like I said, using that privilege that you may have to bring African Americans to the decision-making table. So if you're if you're a city council person, you know, looking towards African Americans as, you know, for your appointments to, and maybe mentoring and those kinds of things, and helping to kind of move that power shift. So giving, you know, I don't think it's giving up a power, but I think it's sharing power with people. I think registering to vote and vote the value. So you need to make sure and help us also pay attention to you know, what I talked about earlier in terms of that change, where we think we've won, but there's just chipping away. But you have to stay in here with us and help us to keep that fight going, because it's not, it doesn't stop just at that moment. It's endless. There's still powers and influence that want things to go back the way they were, you know, and so we really need that. So vote with your feet. Come protest with us. Make sure, you know, you look around that room and say, hey, you know what? I don't see a single, you know, African American or a person of color in this room, and we're talking some, you know, this is a very important topic. How do we bring, how you know, determine how you could bring that diversity and inclusion into, whether it's the workplace, whether that's out there in community decision-making process, just asking those questions and then taking action in order to make it different. And I think also teaching your kids, you know, teaching your kids how to be you know, I lately I've been talking a lot, I've been reading about being an anti-racist, and so and being very clear that it's very clear that you can, it's hard to be colorblind because it doesn't allow us to be fully engaged as people with a history and experience and a culture. And so being colorblind kind of limits us, and also knowing that there's you know, all of this injustice, that if you just ignore it, it doesn't make the world better. You got to engage in it and make the change, and really to think about how we change systems here in this country, and be the walk beside us, walk behind us, but make sure that we keep walking together so that we can really institute changes that will really bring that dream of equality for all and equity for all. You know, there's no reason why you know, that some people should be dying of COVID, you know, in specific African Americans across the country. Here it's Latinos, but also just kind of taking a look at that and not saying, hey, we want to stop wearing our mask and go out, when there's all these people suffering who we need to think about. And we're all in this together in a sense, I'm saying, but I know that there's people who really don't think that way. So you have to fight that along with us.
Well, it makes me think about how African Americans make up 2% of Sonoma County. And while our nation is rightfully focused on racism and the African American experience right now. What we're learning about racism can be expanded to our anti-racist work in Sonoma County that could include Latino, Latinx, Native American, Asian. So what are we learning that is a part of the whole racist systemic institution that we need to break down and make it relevant locally as well?
Yeah, I think that for me, and one of the things that I've always been told occasionally by people, particularly people who are of, of different ethnicities, so whether it's Native American, Latino, or others, that to be, I think, a true anti-racist, you have to think across the board and think of those vulnerabilities. So here it's Latinx community that's suffering at higher rates of COVID-19. But then you go, I talked to my sister who lives in New Mexico, and she talks about the Navajo Nation who is suffering big time because of COVID-19, and to the point where they put roadblocks around a particular town because of COVID-19, and it's mostly Navajo. So that across the country there is a systemic. We all have this common experience in terms of racism. Maybe our roots and our experience are different, but sometimes it does look the same. So so if you fight that systemic, it's hard to separate, I think, that systemic racism into one category of people that they're really looking at as kind of, look, we have a system that is unjust. Here, this is what it looks like. Here, this is it. Here at this different location, this is what it looks like. So being able to understand that the real problem is a systemic racism that's inherent in the system, and being able to say, let's make it different. So no matter who comes to the table, there's that we've worked out a system where they can that they aren't negatively impacted because of something that our system does to them. Mm-hmm. And I certainly, I've always been, I think since I was a kid, I've always been interested in being in the underdog. I don't want, I don't feel like that I want to root for the side that's overwhelmingly winning, or has all the power. I want the underdog who is struggling. And I think that might be, a big reason why I do the work I do. So I want to look for vulnerability. I want to look for people who have the most to lose, but also the most to gain if they gain that influence. And so I feel like we have to be stewards of that change. Whether you're white, whether you're Black, whether you're Latinx, whether you're Native American, that again, I feel like we're all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. And so all the people, it's refreshing right now with all the protests. And I share this story about walking, and coming upon the protests on Mendocino Avenue. So a lot of young people, just a mosaic of race and color, and I just remember thinking, as I was going in, I was hearing the chants, Black Lives Matter, and all of that, and I kind of felt good. I kind of got into it a little bit, and then I actually walked into the middle of the crowd as they were moving along, and I just stood there and I said, this feels good, and I feel like a burden has been lifted, that all of a sudden, it might not be perfect, but people are more understanding and are willing to understand, and they're willing to go out there and fight for justice, fight for me, and it was liberating to think, what, they got this. I can move on. I can I took my picture and I stood there for a little bit as they funneled by, and then I walked the other way because I said, they got this, you know, and there's a willingness today that I'm excited about that I don't think we can pass up. And even African Americans that I talk to are very energized, you know, and angry and energized and really wanting to change things. And so, you know, coming up and having conversations. Again, you think about my background and things I like to see as people at the policy table. So meeting with the mayor and meeting with the head of SRJC and really saying this is what we need in order to thrive in our community, you know, so what are you going to do for us? And so I think that's important. And I really think that's, as American, as the hope that or the promise of America, that we can get to a point where, you know, Black Lives Matter and that we get to the point where people feel their power and influence, are able to go and take it and get involved. So.
And where they can step into the center of a crowd and feel the burden lifted.
Yes.
That is a really powerful image of what it feels like when we are all in it together.
Yes. Yeah. And be able to have conversations about it that are open. And I will tell you that, like I said, I don't have these conversations, you know, in mixed company in the past. And now it's time that we are able to really listen, you know, listen to your African American brothers and sisters and making sure that they're heard and not making us feel like we're making it up or that we're somehow not as, you know, looking at a situation, we're not looking at it in the most intelligent way, you know, that there's these feelings, you know, that have come from experience, have come from a sense of injustice, and you want us to trust, but we need you to listen in order for us to trust and be and understand what's going on for us. Right. So,
and hear the truth.
Yes.
The truth of history, really let that truth sink in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so just think about it, even with that, it's our truth is so skewed by how we're educated and you know, how we're brainwashed, you know, through the media and et cetera, that right now, so it's a lot of undoing. And then there's the forces that want to kind of change history to make it match what they believe. And, you know, you sit there and you're going like, that didn't happen that way. But that's what, you know, a total group of the community believes and are throwing out there to the rest of the community, and not really listening to the voices saying, hey, wait, let's think about this. I have an eyewitness from Oklahoma when they burned the whole town from Tulsa, you know, and killed, you know, over 300 people, you know, Black people there. And then there's this kind of whitewash that goes on around history. And so we really don't know, you know, or you have a limited sense of the reality of what other people are going through or what they've gone through in this country and how it impacts them.
Yeah. So I want to be sure that we have time for any questions. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see questions. So I'm just, I'll see if I can find questions on Facebook if there are any, and encourage people if they'd like to ask questions to do that. But you did talk a little bit about what you fear. What gives you hope?
I think that just being, you know, that story I told about being in that crowd, that gives me hope. Young people who are marching and you know, are carrying Black Lives Matter signs and I'll tell you that kind of one of my secret things that I went downtown as the younger kids were protesting, and I kept seeing them. They were going between protests on Highway 101, and then they were coming back. And I just remember I've never ever felt like people really spoke to me. Sometimes it's been, you know, people across the street, and you know, sometimes it's people locking their doors, you know, their car doors when they see me. But those kids were just, hey, and very expressive and smiling, and you know, behind their mask, of course, you could tell. But that sense that there's this new part of the movement is these younger generations who are getting involved and wanting to get active. So my youth group members, you know, a member texted me on a Sunday and talked about, I want to do something. What can we do? And you know, being able to have that dialogue, which I've learned to do over text, but to really feel that passion in terms of wanting to see change, but also seeing commonality, you know, in terms of what happened in Minneapolis, and the experience for not only Black people, but also how the idea of, you know, this system needs to change. And so that gives me an abundance of hope, and that generation has, you know, really has that sense of making a difference. And then also the fact that so many African Americans throughout the country are saying, hell no, we need to do something about this. And they're going out there and they're really, you know, seeking that change rather than just letting it go.
Mm-hmm. So we do have one question, and you and I spoke about it, and I know you have a list in your head about specific actions along with protesting that you would recommend that people take that could bring about that meaningful change. How can we help to do more was the question.
I think one element is educating themselves or themselves about the reality for African Americans. I think you know, there's a lot of good books out there, and I think we can post a book list of really educational opportunities for people, but not stopping there. So you get your education, but one thing that's critical is to be an ally all the time. So it doesn't mean, for me, it doesn't mean you can go off and, you know, be with your friends at the pool party and, you know, and not be an anti-racist there. It means standing up all the time and really helping to make that change. I talked about the youth and making sure that the values of being anti-racist are given to children and having them understand what's going on. So I think, so volunteering for social justice organizations, you know, is kind of key. People are always looking for opportunities and for people who are willing to volunteer for the cause. Donating to the cause is very important. So I particularly think that I'm community engagement and you know, looking at policy, how can you help further those policies and using your power. I mean, I think the big thing is using your power, even if you don't think you have any, you do. And I think that privilege is kind of a key. And I think one thing that one incident for me happened at a gas station where I stood up for a Eritrean man who was taking a little bit long for, you know, at the gas pump, and this man went off on him, and I said, hey, you know, and I didn't even have to go on because the man knew he was wrong, and I just gave him that look, you know, and that you need to stop kind of feeling. And he said, oh, okay. And interesting enough, he apologized to me. He didn't apologize to the man, but it was interesting. He apologized to me, and then he went about his business. And and the reaching man looked at me and he said, "Thank you."
Mm-hmm.
And that made my evening. So it made my evening, it made my day, it made, it was just so powerful to know that I was able to stand up for someone else. So I think that people, if you do that in your everyday life, um, and invest in um, you know the in making a difference and making a change, that we supporting those causes is very important to making sure that we don't forget, we don't look at the next shiny thing and just move about our business as usual, that we keep the fire going.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say the fire, I don't mean necessarily riots. I just think that we need people to still come out and still support the cause in their own individual way, um, and and be that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have another question here. So, Vince, what do you think about the SRPD and Mayor's declaration about a pledge to my brother's keeper and 8 can't wait police reform?
I think we need to still look. I mean, and that's another thing people can do. So let's look at those very closely and make sure they're implemented if we like them, if we and truly understand what we're asking. So I'd like to take a look. Actually, I have a call in a couple of days, basically doing that, taking a deeper look at what the community engagement plan is for the city, and being able to give our input. So don't turn away, I think, is the most important thing. Just because, whether it's SRPD or, police in LA or any other where in the country, that we can't, we need to make sure that there's an accountability um, for, our police force, and then also for our civic leaders. And and I think that those policies are interesting. We need to really look at them and make sure that if they are good for our community, we should make sure that they happen and keep the pressure on to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. So we just have another minute or two. Really, so much gratitude to you, Vince. Are there any words that you want to leave us with?
I think so. I am very, ending with hope again, that I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have this talk. And I feel like I also want to say to you that I've never really had this conversation in such a full length with I keep saying the mixed audience, but it's very important that I understand the importance of now, and I understand that the importance of the fact that now is important, but we also need to be thinking ahead. And so all your questions about what can I do, I think it's an evolution. You do what you can, and then I want you to be looking up for the next step. How do I power up and move up on this ladder towards what I think our the promise of our community is that we have that equity for all. And then how can I support others in understanding and helping them to shift what they're thinking, whether it's that relative that's on the fence, maybe that kind of is listening to I'll say it, Fox News, and getting all their information from that side, and not and just needs someone to say, hey, wait a minute, I need you to kind of look at this side of it, and understand that understanding part, and that wisdom that you can bring to those conversations when you're not around Black people, or if you're a Black person. I'm encouraging you all to stand up and speak at this point in time, because this is our time.
Well, it's been a true honor to listen to you, and I really appreciate your willingness and your boldness to spend an hour with me and with everyone who has joined us on Facebook to tell your story and help us learn from you. I'm really, really grateful. to you, Vince, and grateful to Community Action Partnership for putting out a statement. Lots of organizations have put out a Black Lives Matter statement, but your statement included the commitment to have 8 conversations about racism. And that's a bold step. And I look forward to following along with these conversations over the next, there'll be 7 more. I think they're all on Monday nights. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So
and I'll be hosting. They talked me into hosting 4 of these. So after this, I'll be the host and doing the interviewing. And I have really enjoyed, having you be the first interviewer, because I've seen you in the community doing a lot of great work. And as I told you earlier, that I said, they asked me who would be the perfect person to start this off, and I said you would be the perfect person, and I couldn't think of a second or a third or a fourth. So when they came back to me and said that you're going to do it, I think I was so excited to it kind of helped melt away a lot of my fears, and also my nervousness about this moment when I'm really having a conversation that I normally wouldn't have. So I thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for joining us.
Yeah.